The colonization of the Americas by Europeans was a complex and often brutal process that had devastating consequences for indigenous peoples. One of the most destructive aspects of European colonization was the introduction of diseases like smallpox, influenza, and measles. Indigenous populations had no immunity to these diseases, resulting in catastrophic epidemics that decimated their communities. As Europeans established colonies, they often sought to expand agricultural and resource extraction activities, leading to the displacement of indigenous communities from their ancestral lands. This displacement was sometimes achieved through force and violence, as European settlers pushed indigenous peoples off their land to make way for their own settlements and economic activities. Some interactions between European settlers and indigenous nations involved negotiated agreements or treaties. However, many of these treaties were later broken or not honored, leading to further displacement and loss of land for indigenous peoples. The process of colonization often involved violent conflicts over land, resources, and cultural differences, as European settlers and indigenous peoples clashed over competing interests. European colonizers also sought to impose their own cultural and religious practices on indigenous populations, suppressing native languages, traditions, and belief systems. Indigenous peoples were sometimes subjected to forced labor, including enslavement or coerced work on European-owned plantations or in mines. The arrival of Europeans also led to the exploitation of natural resources, sometimes at the expense of indigenous communities that depended on those resources for their livelihoods. European colonizers established systems that systematically discriminated against indigenous peoples, relegating them to marginalized positions within the newly formed societies. This systemic discrimination continues to have lasting effects on indigenous communities, impacting their access to resources, opportunities, and rights within society. Contemporary efforts for justice often involve addressing issues such as land rights, cultural preservation, and the recognition of indigenous sovereignty. It is crucial to acknowledge the negative consequences of colonization on indigenous populations and to work towards reconciliation and promoting the rights and well-being of indigenous peoples. Understanding the history of European colonization of the Americas is essential for recognizing the ongoing impact of these events on indigenous communities. By acknowledging the injustices of the past and working towards a more equitable future, we can begin to address the legacy of colonization and support the rights and well-being of indigenous peoples.